You're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics with guest Heidi Sieck, the co-founder and CEO of Vote Pro-Choice.
Are you listening?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly. This is Two Broads Talking Politics, and the other broad with me today is Heidi Sieck. Heidi is the CEO and co-founder of Vote Pro-Choice. So hi, Heidi.
Hello, Kelly. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. So I want to dig into all sorts of important legislation type things that are happening. But could we start with just a little bit about what Vote Pro-Choice is, just for our listeners who might not be quite as aware of it, just to give them a sense of what it is and what you're doing?
Happy to share that. Basically, Vote Pro-Choice is the political home for the nation's pro-choice majority. Over 77% of this country believe in reproductive freedom, do not want Roe v. Wade overturned, believe that we should all have access to abortion. And so we're really the place where you can go to get all the information that you need, how to vote pro-choice in every election everywhere. And we also feature great pro-choice champion candidates who are running in elections all the time. So that's the basic thing about what we do. But we actually started in March of 2016. We just were a simple voter guide. We wanted to be a simple voter guide to try to encourage people who are voting at the top of the ticket for Hillary Clinton to finish their ballot, because what we've learned over time with voter behavior is only about 30% of the people who vote in presidential elections will finish their ballot, go all the way down the ballot to the school boards and the judges. And so we really needed everybody to be voting all the way down the ballot through the lens of reproductive freedom. And that's how we started. So it was just supposed to be a voter guide. And then after the outcome of the 2016 election, we realized how important it was to deepen our commitment to voter information and also supporting great candidates who are running.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of the realities on the ground of 77% of people are pro-choice, and yet state legislatures are full of anti-choice legislators. So how does that happen? What does that look like? What is going on right now in this country?
Okay, Kelly, we have a serious situation here. And this is a top line thing that I want to make sure that all of your listeners know and that we all need to be aware of. First of all, when we are talking about abortion, reproductive rights, I want to make sure that folks don't close their ears. This is not a women's issue. It's not a check to Planned Parenthood. This is a fundamental values-based issue of freedom for everyone to be able to make decisions about their bodies, their families, whether they want to have families, if they want to grow their families, how they want to take care of themselves and each other. This is a fundamental issue of freedom. So don't close your ears, everyone. This is a conversation for every single person in the United States of America. But I'm specifically talking to the 77% of Americans who believe in reproductive freedom. That's a lot. So what has happened over the years is Roe v. Wade was passed or decided by the Supreme Court in 1973, which provided a constitutional protection to abortion in certain trimesters. So government was not allowed to do any kind of regulation of abortions in the first trimester. There were some allowances for some regulation in the second trimester. And then for the third trimester, it was really just states' rights issue. Now, over the years, particularly in the 80s, the Republican Party, basically kind of the Reagan folks, realized that they actually had this small minority of voters. It's the anti-choice, white supremacist, super conservative group. It's about 18% of the voters that they absolutely had to have voting with them in order to win elections. So they made a decision in the 80s to really create infrastructure and invest in infrastructure to be able to keep that minority of radical conservative folks with the Republican Party. And that's when we started to see an extraordinary amount of investment in protest infrastructure, legislation, money that was flowing into leadership development, particularly at state and local levels. And then, of course, the federal judges and recruitment of conservative judges and development of judges. And so I was working in Nebraska at the time in the 90s, early 90s. I grew up in Nebraska. My first job in college was at Planned Parenthood of Lincoln, Nebraska. I was teaching sex ed and working as in clinic intake at the time. And I also had a job at the unicameral, the state legislature. And that in the early 90s was the time when this infrastructure started to test pieces of legislation that were going to try to chip away at Roe v. Wade in that second trimester and the third trimester sections. So this is where we started to see the weird propaganda, the weird medical procedures that the anti-choice minority were describing, the words that they were using, which is not real, is like partial birth abortion, that kind of thing. Back in the day, this was all propaganda. And we started to see that being tested in those early 90s. And over the course of the last 30 years, hundreds, thousands of pieces of these pieces of legislation have been passed in state legislatures to chip away at access that was presented, that was fundamentally established by Roe. Where we're at today is a 30-year investment in that infrastructure to keep that anti-choice minority voting with Republicans. That's the big picture. Now, we can talk about specifics, but I just want to make sure folks know that this has been an insidious political strategy that's got propaganda, misinformation wrapped around it. And this infrastructure that is funded by conservative Republican political money at the millions and millions and millions of dollars, it really does, it iterates. So it's constantly iterating and innovating about different ways to control and manipulate this issue of reproductive freedom. So we can dive more into detail, but I just wanted to give that big picture here. We've been victims of this insidious minority infrastructure for entirely too long.
Yeah, and I think that money piece is important. People may not realize how much money can go into state and local elections, that a lot of states and localities don't have the same kind of campaign finance. Even if we don't think campaign finance regulations are enough at the federal level, at least they exist and often don't exist in these smaller races and really can be bought in a way.
Yeah, those local elections at city, school boards, city councils, mayors, state legislatures, they're not big ticket item elections. And the conservative machine realized this and realized how important it was to invest in those early leadership pipelines. So, that's one of the things that we didn't do, the pro-choice nation, the pro-choice majority didn't do over the course of time. And it's been to our peril. And that's where we have to really rethink that, because from my perspective, and it's true, every single elected official has a stake in protecting or expanding reproductive freedom. And when you talk to folks about, oh, I'm running for city council, this doesn't apply to me or anything, that's not true. Every single elected official has a stake. So, for example, school boards set sex ed policy and can really weigh in on that and access to birth control or even contraceptives in schools. It's a huge, important policy piece for kids in schools. Now, guess what? The anti-choice minority and now QAnon are really focusing on schools because they know that's school boards, because they know that's the beginning of a leadership pipeline. City councils can really do a lot around both what's happening with the placement and zoning of health clinics and also protection of protesters or people visiting health clinics. Additionally, mayors and city councils can also make sure that health insurance for their employees include reproductive health services. So that's a story I often tell. I grew up in Nebraska. I worked at Planned Parenthood. And Nebraska has all kinds of limiting laws to access abortion. It's like waiting periods, medically unnecessary ultrasounds, all kinds of restrictions. But a decade later, when I was living in San Francisco and working for the city of San Francisco, I was just out of a divorce, messed up my birth control pills, got accidentally pregnant with the first guy I dated after my marriage. That is not the guy that you want to have a, co-parent with at all. And I was able to have an abortion that was covered by insurance going directly to my OBGYN. And that was just by nature of the zip code in which I lived. It would have been a totally different story if I was still in Nebraska. And guess what? Those were elected officials that made those decisions. Now, we can look at a situation in 2016 where there was a young woman in Indiana who was incarcerated, who served time in jail for inducing a miscarriage using the same pills, abortion pills that I used. She induced a miscarriage herself and was thrown in jail and served time in jail and charged with a 20-year felony. And think about all the elected officials that were involved in that. It was an elected coroner, elected district attorney, it was elected state legislature. And of course, the judge that made that decision was appointed by Governor Mike Pence.
Yes.
So think about all of those elected officials and, what we talked about before, those local state electeds are making decisions about access to reproductive health.
So then let's talk specifically about Texas and
yes.
decisions that the elected officials there are making, disastrous decisions that they're making. So what is it that is going on in Texas, and how soon does this go into effect?
Oh, it's so scary. Oh my God. Okay. So I'm going to tell you, again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm also not a doctor. So I'm going to just give you the broad strokes of the situation. But I want to say these types of pieces of legislation they're not new. They're just trying new things. So Texas in May, Governor Greg Abbott, who is up for re-election next year and must be removed from office, Governor Greg Abbott signed into law a bill that's called SB 8 that would enable anyone to sue anyone else who has enabled an abortion after 6 weeks. And this is it's going to go into effect on September 1st. Of course, Planned Parenthood, the Center for Reproductive Rights, ACLU, and all of our amazing reproductive rights organizations have sued in this regard. But what is so insidious and weird and wild about this particular piece of legislation, which is, once again, the overly funded anti-choice minority infrastructure is trying to innovate, this one's really creepy. So it enables individuals to enforce this 6-week ban. It's not like an overarching 6-week ban. It's like creating a bounty on abortions or vigilantes who say it's okay. So if a doctor is providing me an abortion after 6 weeks, or my friend drives me to the clinic to get that abortion, anyone who knows about that can sue the doctor or the person driving me. So it could be like my ex-boyfriend in wherever, Chicago, who may know that I'm getting an abortion in Texas, can sue the Lyft driver that takes me to the clinic. And that's the way that they're enforcing it. So it's this legal, mind vortex of individual human beings in your life are enforcing a 6-week abortion ban. So it's the creepiest, most insidious thing that you've ever heard. And what happens is if the Lyft driver who drives me to the clinic gets a $10,000 bounty from the government. So the government is paying off individuals to report on my reproductive healthcare decisions. That's this law. I hope I'm explaining it in a way that it's just so terrifying. And that's what is the truth about this infrastructure, is that they have outsized power, but their perspective is control. cruelty, and criminalization. We are talking about underlying all of these trigger bans and these abortion laws is this group really does want to throw people in jail for exercising their reproductive freedom. So that's the vigilante law. Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and the lawsuit is actually basically they had to sue every judge in Texas, every county clerk, everyone they could think of and put this in the lawsuit because it's just a very weird way to enforce a 6-week abortion ban. Terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and the thought that anybody would even know you were 6 weeks pregnant.
Oh, I didn't know I was pregnant at 6 weeks. No, it is like, that's just 2 weeks after a missed period. That is just scary. It's so scary. But this is happening on September 1st. Now, let's hope the district court will block this. Let's hope. But we don't know anymore because here's the thing is we've got a bunch of Trump appointed judges, like I think it's like 3 in 10 judges are Trump appointed judges at the federal and district court level. So, which leads to the next Texas situation, which is it's even creepier because we've got judges that are really getting down into the specific aspects of a medical procedure. So what happened is that on August 18th, the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, which is the level of court that's right before the Supreme Court, they ruled that a Texas law that was passed, I think in 2017 or 18, that doctors and the Texas law is limiting a procedure called a D&E procedure that's used in second trimester abortions. And what's really scary about this is the first time that a federal circuit court has directly limited access, a pre-viability access. So viability is like 24 weeks, I think, 24, 25, 6. So this is the first time the United States judicial system has said, we are going to legislate what your doctors are doing to your body early. And it basically is making any kind of abortion procedure within that second trimester much more invasive and painful. And so what we saw in this particular decision, this Fifth Circuit decision, was these judges were actually using propaganda terms that were funneling through the disinformation process. It was things like dissecting a frog in high school and using terms like that, or they compared the procedure to being drawn and quartered. It's really gross. So that means this disinformation and propaganda that's flowing around is actually seated in the district court. So what's really, really scary about this is that only the Supreme Court can overturn this case. So that means in Texas, second trimester abortions are really regulated. Now, this particular exact limitation has been overturned in other states. So it's a unique situation in Texas and the Fifth Circuit, but it just leads us to what the hell is the Supreme Court going to do?
Yeah, and we'll find that out pretty soon, right? This is in the next sitting of the Supreme Court. We're likely to get several cases, probably.
Yeah, so we can talk about that. So again, the last 30 years has all been about limiting access. So, about 56% of this country lives in a place that's hostile to their reproductive freedom, meaning there's limited access. While people will say, yes, abortion is constitutional, it is absolutely constitutional for you to get an abortion, to be able to exercise reproductive freedom. But the states have made it so difficult to get access to it through all the little tiny laws, the waiting periods, the medically unnecessary tests, all of the different ways that they limit access. And so in 56% of the country, access is limited, which is terrible. And this has been happening over time. And so these trigger bans, these abortion bans, all unconstitutional on its face, they end up going through this court system and they hit the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court for the last few years has had about 20 cases of that they could take up at any time to really decide to make a global federal ruling on the future of abortion and reproductive freedom. And this year, they decided to take up one of those cases, which is the Mississippi 15-week abortion ban. Terrifying, because we have a 6-3 conservative majority, and we don't know what they're going to do. So we have heard that the oral arguments for this case will be between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the decision could come sometime before next June. So we're looking at a real straight up, direct, in the crosshairs overturn of Roe v. Wade. It's real. This is real. This is not hyperbole, which would basically turn all regulation of reproductive freedom, access, and abortion to the states. And as I've described before, the states are just a mess of access and trigger bans and limitations all over the place. So we have a problem. We have a real problem.
So I want to talk about sort of what to do in a minute. But first, just to sort of put this in context for people, this won't affect everyone equally, right? So even in the places where access is difficult, there are some people, right, who are going to have the privilege of being able to just drive somewhere else, go to another state and get access, or, so who are the people who are going to be most affected in these states that are going to limit or completely deny if Roe is overturned?
It's already bad for folks now. So this has huge impact on people who have low income, don't have time they can take off from work, have kids that might need daycare. And the people I have in my mind right now are 1 in 4 women will have an abortion, and 2/3 of them are already mothers. So we're talking about people who are making decisions for a myriad of reasons, economic reasons, personal reasons. They already have 3 kids and can't afford another one. There's a million reasons for a person to exercise their reproductive freedom. So this will have great impact on low income folks, people of color, all people really. But we're talking about the reason why I'm so passionate about reproductive freedom as a whole is that this is about people having the ability to have control over their lives, like the way that they live their life, their budgets, their economic opportunity, their educational opportunity. This is, and every single one of us have a different story. And so many people, like I said, 56% of the country lives in a place that's hostile reproductive freedom. So obviously it's going to impact poor, low income folks, but it's also going to just impact moms and anyone who doesn't have time to go jump through all these hoops that are being put in place by the states.
So like you say, this is real. This is on us now. This is terrifying. So what should everyone be doing?
I'm so glad you asked that. So this has been the passion of my life, because as I was, I was 19 years old, sitting in the unicameral, my head full of Planned Parenthood information and the stories of people that I was helping access birth control and exercising their reproductive freedom. And I'm sitting in the state legislature and in 1992, and this elected state senator stands up and starts introducing this restrictive piece of legislation that's all about propaganda and has nothing to do with the reality of people's lives. And I remember I was sitting 5 feet away from her thinking to myself, who are you and what are you doing? You're lying about what's actually happening in people's lives. And so I have committed myself to making sure that we elect people in every office who believe in the fundamental importance of reproductive freedom in all aspects. So that's what we all need to do. And we particularly need to do it in local and state offices. So here's the thing. There are elections happening all the time, all across the country, not just every 4 years. So in 2021, there are 45,000 races in 31 states on the ballot. These are local elections in New Jersey and Virginia. They're statewide elections. So every single person, please, 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 you've got to vote in your local elections. And for Vote Pro Choice, we actually do provide a nationwide voter guide that has researched every single race down the ballot to provide you a information and a framework that you can cast a ballot in support of reproductive freedom. So vote, 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 vote. Secondly, I really want folks to run for office at the local level if they can. And we're talking about Democratic Party delegates. We're talking about town councils. We're talking about school boards. There's a ton of things that you can do to get involved because we need you to engage. It's not that hard. We will also help you. So it's vote pro choice in every election. Know what's happening in your state and local races and elections. Run for office if you can. And, now I want to be honest, it's going to be real dire in Texas starting in September 1st. And it's going to be real dire if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned next year. So we are going to still have to be writing checks to Planned Parenthood, independent clinics, abortion funds, the Texas abortion funds. That's going to be really important to continue to give our philanthropic money. But I also just want to say that this is also any gender expression that you have, if you identify as male, female, non-binary, LGBTQIA, this is something that we need everybody involved in. So this is not just women protecting reproductive freedom. This is calling in everybody. We need everybody doing this. So if you believe that freedom and reproductive freedom is a fundamental value that you want in the United States of America, and particularly if you want for your life, then please do the things that I've asked. And at voteprochoice.us, we've provided those basic tools for you to take those actions.
Great. And we'll put links in our show notes to your website and the social media and your social media as well. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we talk about?
Yeah. This is a really tricky time that we live in right now because we are a majority pro-choice nation, but we're fighting against folks that have outsized power, and particularly folks that believe in criminalization of reproductive freedom. So this is where we all need to really own our own personal stigmas about this. What I have noticed is progressives, Democrats, people don't really want to talk about it. They're like, abortion, yeah, I support it, but I don't want to talk about it. It's very personal, and it's very filled with all kinds of kind of uncomfortable feelings and some stigma from the propaganda that's coming at us, and maybe from our own personal, moral, ethical perspectives. But the key here is that this is a personal choice, and we all really do have to fight back against political elected officials with a concept of that they believe that they should be standing in the room with us when we're making decisions that are very personal, in the room with our doctor, making personal decisions about our family. This is about control and criminalization. We have to ask ourselves, do we want sheriff's deputies and police officers to be in the hospital and the doctor's office with us when we're making decisions about something so personal as what's going on with our bodies and our families and our pregnancies? And so people may have stories about how they call themselves pro-choice or how they feel about abortion. But at the end of the day, I really need folks to just understand that this is something that we need everyone to be involved in, and they need to help us protect this fundamental right.
Well, thank you, Heidi. That is really powerful. And I am so grateful to you for coming on and talking to me and for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.